Ladies, come here. Them niggas in Egypt, they weren't kings. They were at home raising children and weaving. I said, those niggas back in the history of Egypt were not kings. They stayed at home with their children and weaved. No, you must be like, Dana, what the hell are you talking about, girl? What are you talking about? When God was a woman, that's what I'm talking about. Chapter 3. Yes, you heard me right. Chapter 3. Okay, and what does chapter 3 say? If we go to page 35, it says, Egypt, while the husbands stay home and weave. Let me read this little tidbit to you. Story time. In prehistoric Egypt, the goddess held supremacy in Upper Egypt, the south, as Nekhebt. I hope I said that right. Symbolized as a vulture. The people of Lower Egypt, which includes the northern Delta region, worship their supreme goddess as a cobra, using the name Uazit, great serpent. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly either. From about 3000 BC onward, the goddess known as Nut, Net, or Nit, probably derived from Nekhebt, was said to have existed when nothing else had yet been created. She then created all that had come to being. According to Egyptian mythology, it was she who first placed Ra, the sun god, in the sky. Other texts of Egypt tell the goddess as Hathor in the role of creator of existence, explaining that she took the form of a serpent at the time. In Egypt, the concept of the goddess always remained vital. The introduction of male deities, just as dynastic periods begin, about 3000 BC, will be more thoroughly discussed in this chapter 4. This probably lessened her original supremacy as it was known as the Neolithic societies, but goddess worship continued. And in conjunction with this, the women of Egypt to have benefited in many ways. Diodorus wrote at great length of the worship of the goddess Isis, the Greek translation for Osset, who had incorporated the aspect of both Uazit and Hathor. Isis was also closely associated with the goddess as Nut, who was mythologically recorded as her mother. In paintings, Isis wore the wings of Nekbet. Diodorus explained that, according to the Egyptian religion, Isis was revered as the inventor of agriculture, as a healer and a physician, and as the one who first established the laws of justice in the land. He then recorded what we today may find as most startling description of the laws of Egypt, explaining that they were the result of the reverence paid to this mighty goddess. He wrote, "It is for this reason, in fact, that it was ordained that the queen should have greater power and honor than the king, and that among private persons the wife should enjoy authority over the husband. Husbands agreeing in marriage contract that they will be obedient in all things to their wives." I'm gonna just jump a little bit ahead because, you don't get a lot of time on here. And this is just an expert out of this chapter. It says, Professor Cyrus Gordon wrote in 1953 of life in ancient Egypt. He tells us that in family life, women had a peculiarly important position for inheritance passed through the mother rather than through the father. This system may well hark back to prehistoric times when only the obvious relationship between mother and child was recognized, but not the less apparent relationship between father and child. I actually jumped a little bit too much forward. Let me just bring it back a little bit because this was kind of where I was heading with this. Fraser commented on the relationship between the veneration of Isis and the customs of female kinship and stated that in Egypt, the archaic system of motherkin, with its preference for women over men in matters of property and inheritance, lasted down to the Roman times. There is further evidence that Egypt was a land where women had great freedom and control over their lives and perhaps of their husbands. Herodotus of Greece, several centuries before Diodorus, wrote that wrote that in Egypt, women go in the marketplace, transact affairs, and occupy themselves with business, while the husbands stay home and weave. His contemporary Sophocles stated that their thoughts and actions are modeled on the Egyptian ways, for there the men sit at the loom indoors while the wives work abroad for their daily bread. And now I'm going to jump back forward to that first part that I jumped to. Dr. Murray suggested that women's conditions was high due to perhaps their economic independence. S.W. Barron writes that in Egypt Papier, I don't know if I said that correctly, many women appear at parties in civil litigations and independent business transactions, even with their own husbands and fathers. One of the earliest archaeologists of the pyramids of Egypt, Sir William Flinders Petrie, wrote in 1925 that in Egypt, all property went to the female line. The woman was the mistress of the house, and in the early tales, she is represented as having an entire control over herself and the place. Discussing the position of women in ancient Egypt, theologian and archaeologist Roland Deveau wrote in 1965 that in Egypt, the wife was often the head of the family, with all the rights such as position entailed. Obedience was urged upon husbands in the maximum of Patep Hotep. Marriage contracts of all periods attest the extremely independent social and economic position of women. According to E. Meyer, who was quoted in the Verting study, among the Egyptians, the women were remarkably free. As late as the 4th century BC, there existed side by side with patriarchal marriage, a form of marriage in which wife chose the husband and could divorce him on payment of compensation. I thought they were kings! If you don't know, I have been reading and commentary on this book, a read and review, shall we say, on my YouTube channel. If you are not a part of that YouTube channel, get to it. I am currently on chapter 4, which I'll be reading and reviewing this weekend and uploading sometime this week. If you are interested in learning more, if you've read this book, interested in this book, come join me. And to the men out there, please don't bother me, okay? Don't bother me. Don't bother me. I'm just reading. I'm learning, okay? Don't bother me.